Months after marijuana dispensaries debuted in other Arkansas cities, the state's largest gets the go-ahead. Why the delay? The politics of 2020. Could Arkansas Democrats support a different New York billionaire? And if so, which Democrats? And how big a factor race, age, ideology? The confusion in the nation's capital. How much impact on politics in our capital, in our state? Arkansas Week, next.
Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and KUAR FM 89.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. First Iowa, then New Hampshire, a couple more coming up before Super Tuesday, Arkansas included. We'll kick that around in the next half hour and have a look at the curious case of cannabis in Pulaski County. We're joined by Representative Fred Allen, Democrat of Little Rock, and Assistant Speaker pro tempore Jay Barth, Professor Emeritus of Political Science at Hendrix College, now an Education Officer for the City of Little Rock, Michael Hibblen, News Director of KUAR Public Radio for Central Arkansas. We thank everyone for coming in. A bit of breaking news as we go to press, so to speak, at Mid Morning Friday. The Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit, anyway, has at this hour just returned its decision in the matter of waivers on the Medicaid program, which the Hutchinson administration has previously imposed a work requirement to help ease passage of the appropriation. Mr. Allen, let's start with you. If that is sustained, the strike down of the work requirement, that would seem to perhaps complicate the mission of reaffirming or reappropriating funds for Medicaid. How much of an impediment is that?
At this time, I don't know how much of an impediment it will be, but there will be some possible consequences behind it. But I don't know at what degree right now.
Jay, it, of course, obviously was enormously popular among conservatives.
Yeah, and it clearly was part when the governor came into office. There was a real question mark about how hard he was going to fight for continuation of Medicaid expansion in Arkansas. This has been the kind of crucial piece of luring over a number of very conservative supporters, including some who had actually opposed Medicaid expansion under Governor Beebe. He's kept them in the fold while this long Supreme Court case has gone on. It really does raise some questions now, I guess, less than 2 months before the fiscal session.
Yeah. Michael, any thoughts?
I'm sure the governor's going to be disappointed, and that we'll be hearing from him. I don't know what steps can be taken next regarding this, but we'll definitely take some rethinking from the governor and legislature.
He and his allies, Mr. Hutchinson and his allies, has openly said that we're now 6-7 years into the Medicaid expansion, that it is so woven into the state budget in terms of the hundreds of millions of dollars it pumps back into the state, that to abandon it would really bring on fiscal chaos. Your thoughts on that? Is that persuasive?
Maybe and maybe not. I think at this stage we will have to wait and see.
Jay Barth?
Well, I think the key is the 3/4 requirement, the vote requirement in the House and Senate. Is that I think there's clearly a majority who agrees with the governor about the fundamental essence of the program, not just for healthcare delivery, but also for budgetary matters. But getting that 3/4 maybe.
How big is the majority?
Yeah, how big is the majority? And it's been a close fight every session since what was then the private option got created. The last couple of sessions, it's been a little looser. He's easily had the 75, but that may be about to change, and we get to go back to really fascinating politics around state
budget. Yeah, and if memory serves, the last couple of sessions, anyway, the bigger problem was in the Senate as opposed to the House.
Yes, and that may be about to change, and it is an election year. Now it is after the primaries where there will be some Republican primaries, or one candidate's on Medicaid expansion side, and one's on the other side. So we'll know a little bit. People will be through those elections that they have to cast those tough votes.
Okay, well, on to an election year. Reliable sources tell us that there's a better than fair chance that Mr. Trump will win Arkansas's Republican primary on March 3rd. So we're going to kind of focus on the Democratic side. And there's been Hendrix College Talk Business collaborated once again on a poll, and the numbers.
Yeah, so there were four Democratic candidates who were all bunched between just below 20% and just above 15%, and leading the pack, and it is a pack, was Mike Bloomberg. And what was interesting about this poll, it's really the first state where Mike Bloomberg has been a candidate really from the beginning. He filed along with the other candidates. He's been running at hundreds of thousands of dollars of advertising in the state, and it really has shown that it has paid off. Now, the three candidates just below him, Vice President Biden, Bernie Sanders, and Mayor Buttigieg, they've all gotten a lot of national attention, but they have not really had very active campaigns in Arkansas. And so it's been, on one level, something of an unfair fight in that Bloomberg's had the field to himself in terms of the TV race, but those other candidates have had national attention during this campaign. So crazy close. It is very demographically driven in terms of the race. If the electorate were to skew more young voters, then Bernie Sanders is advantaged because he has such a sharp advantage there. If it skews older, Bloomberg has a real advantage with those folks who are very dependent upon television, I think, for their information about politics. And then, of course, we have racial politics coming as well, with Vice President Biden still doing very well among African American voters. We don't know what the field is going to look like by the time we get to March 3rd. There are clearly two big contests between now and then, but this is going to be a close race, and it feels a little bit like the Republican race did in 2016, where you had kind of three strong candidates running towards the finish. We may have a similar situation here in this side.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, and it also reflects that Michael Bloomberg has put more effort in Arkansas personally, making 2 visits to the state now. Last month, leading the Little Rock Martin Luther King Jr. Day Parade. And he has also hired a lot of people in this state who are now running around on his behalf. I think the state is getting more effort from the Bloomberg campaign than any other candidate. We were going to have Jill Biden in town last week, but her flight was delayed. She didn't make it to an event that was primarily with African American supporters in the legislature. They did bring up the stop and frisk. State Senator Linda Chesterfield point blank told me that she doesn't like Bloomberg because of that policy. Bloomberg apologized for it back in November, and it was brought up again this week when a tape of Bloomberg making rather insensitive or comments that offended a lot of people, so he's had to rehash that again. But we're seeing efforts, I think, to make up for that. This week we got Little Rock Mayor Frank Scott Jr. Announcing his endorsement, also becoming co-chair of the Mike for Black America National Leadership Council. So he's really working to bring on supporters to make up for that, but that's still a very sensitive issue.
Nobody accused ever Mr. Bloomberg of being a stupid man. He knew stop and frisk was coming. He knew, and now there's an added thing, and that's some comments he made about redlining. Mr. Allen, give us a sense, your sense anyway, of the African American community and Mr. Bloomberg's acceptance or lack thereof.
I think it's going to be an uphill battle for Michael Bloomberg. I think the issue with stop and frisk and redlining is something that's not going to go away. I think he has to continually address that at every point and effort in his campaign. It's going to come up. It's going to come up again and again. But the thing that we have to keep in mind, not just with Michael Bloomberg, we cannot be just one issue people. If we're looking for candidates that are not flaws, or if we're looking for flawless candidates, we're not going to find any. I think if you will dig deeper in any candidate's background, you're going to find something that will make you believe he or she should be disqualified.
Mayor Scott's endorsement, how much was that worth?
I think that,
and Mayor Scott isn't the only African-American mayor in the country. Mr. Bloomberg has seemed to really concentrate on the elected black leadership, particularly the municipal leadership across the country.
that is true. I noticed that the mayor of Atlanta, Keisha Reed, has endorsed him, and several mayors from large cities have also endorsed Michael Bloomberg. I think that this is going to be a boost to his campaign, but keep in mind, there's not one particular voice for the African American community. There are various voices in the African American community, and some will play towards supporting him, and some may not play towards supporting him. But Michael Bloomberg is going to be a force to reckon with. But I still think that the Biden campaign is not dead. I think right now there are some things that Joe Biden is going to have to do. He's going to have to win South Carolina. He's going to have to win real big. And he's also going to have to come out strong in Nevada.
Mr. Biden obviously had been doing exceptionally well when you look at the breakdown in the polls with African American voters. You think he is still, we're a few hundred miles away from Columbia or from South Carolina, period. Did New Hampshire and did Iowa damage him at all?
I don't really
and
think.
did the Bloomberg millions that he's throwing in there, is that?
If you look at Joe Biden, he's the only candidate that has come under attack by the other side. The Republican Party has attacked him viciously. And Joe Biden has not changed. I think the way people see Joe Biden has changed. He's still the same Joe Biden, but people see him in a different light, and it's based on the number of attacks that his campaign had to combat. If you keep tagging a person, hitting a person over and over and say that person is a certain way, eventually in your mind, that's what you're going to see when you see Joe Biden.
Yeah. Jay.
I do think there's some very interesting generational politics at work within the African American community. And it's not just young versus old, although I do think that's a pretty clear one. Older African Americans definitely much more loyal to the former vice president than younger. But then even within younger African Americans, we start to see this kind of division between the youngest African Americans, who I think were much more open to Bernie Sanders' message than folks of Frank Scott's generation and the mayors who are showing such success, who seem drawn to Bloomberg and who appreciate his being a mayor, but more importantly, his support for fellow mayors around the country in the time since he left the New York mayorship. So I think that the politics of generations is very interesting, and that there's a big conversation going on there.
Yeah, Mike Hibblen.
We've also got the issue of race came up again this past week when you had State Representative Vivian Flowers and a House candidate who were involved in an incident when coming out of a private fundraiser at a home in the Capitol View Stiff Station neighborhood. Some neighbors yelled at them as they were lingering too long at their car. A shot was apparently fired. Police responded. Guns drawn, and when you have an incident like this, and she's calling for an investigation, asking the prosecuting attorney for Pulaski County to investigate, this just rehashes old wounds when it comes to race, and that's probably also a factor for many, especially in the legislature, when you have this kind of issue happen.
Yep.
But when you talk about race and race relations, most people don't want to talk about it. I think it's a subject that we want to talk about, but we don't want to dive in deep. What we want to do is a surface talk. And when you talking surface, you're not going to come up with any true answers.
It still keeps race. These incidents do, as Michael said, they keep race very much in the forefront of the political dialogue, and particularly in an election year. And obviously, we're not talking about electoral votes. I mean, Arkansas 6 are a foregone conclusion, I think, in the Republican Cup. We are talking about delegates, though, and what it takes to push a candidate, Democratic nominee, over the top. More, Jay, on the ideological and age breakdown.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty significant when you
Very
look at what's
stark.
happened to the two primaries, well, the caucus and the primary thus far.
Yeah, and I do think you hit it. It's about ideology, it's about level of education, it's about age. I mean, this is a pretty fractured Democratic Party, and that has real implications on the delegate side because, you know, the party rules are you have to get 15% of the vote either at the statewide level or congressional district level to get access to delegates. And if the polling that came out this week is accurate, that would mean that you basically have Arkansas's 36 delegates split pretty much 4 ways. I mean, it's not going to be a mammoth draw in any of these states, and that has real implications of whether any candidate can get to the magic number by the time of the Milwaukee convention. This is going to be a really fractured race, and the absence or the dramatic reduction in superdelegates is going to have real real consequences for how this race plays out.
Yeah, it's just notable that George Will, nobody's idea of a liberal, well, maybe in an earlier time he'd be considered. But he said, you know, what the Democrats need to do is bring back super delegates. You know, there's not enough, not enough old pros involved in this delegate selection process.
And that was one of the big wins of the Sanders campaign in 2016. He obviously lost the battle, but he saw. One would not have thought that a guy in his mid-70s had another presidential race in him, but he did, and it changed the rules pretty significantly in a way that really favors him at this stage of the game.
Yeah.
And what happens now, you know, is key. We're just over 2 weeks away from Election Day. Early voting starts Tuesday. Will we get any more candidates coming through? Michael Bloomberg did have a bus of surrogates, including the mayor of Columbia, South Carolina, come through. But are we actually going to get any candidates? That could easily sway, because I know people I spoke with at the Martin Luther King Jr. parade did say, you know, they weren't familiar with politics, but they were impressed to see, you know, a presidential candidate actually out walking the streets of Little Rock leading the parade.
There was this, you know, for a long time, and maybe even still, one of the ruling tenets of Arkansas politics, particularly on the Democrat, well, across the ideological scale, was that Arkansans were looking for the center. They craved the center. And even today, in nationwide polls, most voters, the majority, consider themselves either moderate or independent. And it was noted that in New Hampshire, and I think in Iowa as well, the total number of voters that accrued to the more moderate 2 or 3 candidates far outweighed Mr. Sanders' totals. Does that model still hold in Arkansas, do you think?
I think in general, I think those moderate candidates are going to do pretty well in a state like Arkansas. But the question is, are there too many of them? Do they divvy up the vote and then leave Sanders, who has, I think, a strong, loyal, but young following, in the lead? I think that's the big question. I do think your tenet that Arkansas politics kind of goes to the middle, I think is still pretty true in many ways at the state capitol. And to go back to Governor Hutchinson, where we started the show, in terms of finding these paths that will be compromise paths, I think that still works. But in terms of electoral politics, especially in now a state which is no longer a one-party state, but instead is a skewed towards one party, but still with a viable Democratic Party, you've got real extremism popping into those parties, and the way in which that electoral politics shapes the future of governance, I think has a real story. Because in 2022, when we have an open contest for governor, I think on both sides we're going to have candidates who have to make some appeals to the wings of their party that has some real implications for how well they're going to be able to govern once they're in office.
And which gives rise, not for the first time, to the question of, will the disenchanted by November will they stay at home? Whether they're African American, white, young,
I don't
how
think,
motivated?
I think that the African American community will be motivated to go to the polls to vote. If you look at this present administration, in the path that they're taking this country down, it's clearly not in the best interest of all Americans. And the ones that's being hurt the most are the black and brown people and people that look like me. So we must encourage, inspire, and motivate our people to go to the poll and vote, because voting is the only way that we can change things in this country and change things around the world. It's more than our future that's in stake right now. I think right now America is on the line. So this next election will probably determine the fate of this country. If you look at the number of judges that's being appointed by this administration, it's clearly going to make it difficult for people, for all Americans to make it, but particularly the disenfranchised and the ones that look like me.
Well, the right would seem to be especially energized, and playing devil's advocate, the administration would come right back and say, Mr. Allen, African American unemployment has never been lower. African American wages have never been higher.
Well, you know,
I'm covering that base there.
Okay, let's talk about that for a second.
Quickly though, because
I think it's important that we as African Americans want economic equity, and we should be able to tell why things are being done instead of explaining how things are being done.
Jay, how quick motivation come November?
You know, I think nationally, especially in those states that are the states that are going to matter, the Wisconsins, the Floridas, the Michigans and Pennsylvanias of the world, there's going to be clear motivation. This is going to be an election where states like Arkansas are really irrelevant, even more irrelevant than ever. And so I think there will not be the kind of call to get out to vote in places like this, the way that, at least by the presidential level, now that we got a lot of action going down closer to the bottom of the ticket, that I think creates some activism here. But I think it's going to be a race that, of course, is run in those handful of states, and there's going to be real incredible turnout, I think, in those states.
Marijuana at long last, Michael, in Arkansas's largest city.
Yeah, it's 9 months ago the first dispensaries opened in the state. They were in Hot Springs, and you've got 17 that have been in operation. This week the state gave final approval to the first in Pulaski County, in Little Rock, one on Rodney Parham. There are 2 others in the county that were expected to get final inspections this week and are also likely to open. Yeah, it goes back to this was approved by voters 4 years ago, and state at times was accused of dragging its feet, but Central Arkansas finally getting a dispensary, and the spokesman for the Department of Finance and Administration, Scott Harden, who I'd spoken with, said, you know, it just comes down to the owners and how quickly they can implement it. But yes, interesting that it took so long for the largest city in the state.
How interesting. I mean, what did take so long?
A lot of it, well, there's money. You know, this entity that is opening, this first one, expected to maybe have a soft opening today, you know, changed names, and a lot of these entities have changed ownerships, changed locations. There's a lot of money behind it, so there are just a whole host of factors that come together.
But I think that delay has had some ramifications for energizing further the desire for further expansion to recreation, and you now have, of course, an industry that has grown and taken hold in this state that I think is this battle over marijuana is only beginning, and these delays I think have propelled some energy behind those folks who would say, let's just open it up further.
Yeah, and we've had recently press conferences and campaigns saying don't sign petitions for recreational marijuana.
And a pushback from the religious right, social right. Mr.
2 years ago, I had a chance to visit a couple of dispensaries in Las Vegas, and they were faced with some of the same problems that we're faced with. It took them a little bit longer to get it done because of all the politics that were involved in it.
All right. We've got to leave it there. We're simply out of time. Gentlemen, thank you all for being part of the program. A closing note here. A bit of change around this place. The pros call it rebranding. We came on the air a half century ago as KETS, or in shorthand, ETV. Then we became the Arkansas Educational Television Network, AETN. Now, a few decades on, a new identifier. Beginning February 28th, we're Arkansas PBS. We think it fits nicely. What won't change is our commitment to you, the finest in news, information, education, and entertainment programming, some of it with a British accent. Thanks for sticking with us over the years. We'll continue to work hard to keep your trust, and we'll see you next week.
Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and KUAR FM 89.